Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. The page, I have the document up that I put together notes on this. It's titled Notes on Chess, AI, Poetry, Faith, Politics, and Bullshit, which I'm using in the technical sense. So maybe one place to begin would be with some good, embarrassing news I got recently. Brian asked me on an episode some months ago. I don't know if he pitched it as a hypothetical or if it was a real question at the time, but there was a nephew or like a friend's nephew who wanted to publish a chapbook of poetry, and what I asked, his question was like, how should I go about doing that? My response, which he hated, which Brian hated, and which I'm sure the nephew would have hated as well, was, well, what do you actually want? Like, when you say you want to publish a chapbook of poetry, what does that mean? Because among other things, like, a chapbook of poetry is sort of a nonsensical object. It's not a book of poetry. It's not an individual poem. It's not like, hey, here's a poem I really loved. Let me share it with you. It's a very small collection of poems. Usually like between 10 and 30 pages. I mean, 30 pages, a 30-page chapbook would be quite long, I would think. But like, half to a third to a fourth of an actual book of poetry. It should be on the smaller end rather than the larger end. Like there's a chapbook prize I saw that where you could publish, you could print or send them like a 48-page manuscript. Like 48, that's a full fucking book. Enough of these 100-page books. Let's keep it short. So a chapbook of poetry is a hard thing to make any sense of, because it's not, in addition to not being a whole book of poems, typically it preserves the publishing virginity of the enclosed poems, meaning that you can then publish them again in a full-length collection. It's sort of like when Trent Reznor used to put out an EP of like one new song and 12 remixes, and then he would put out the same thing on a full-length album later. So a chapbook is a hard sell as a concept if you're just trying to sell it to existence, and it's an even harder sell to a purchaser of poetry commercially. Of the poetry chapbooks I've encountered in recent years, the best one by far is a really gorgeous little handmade one that I got all the way from Australia that Alice did. She translated. Alice, of course, speaks Japanese, among other hidden talents, as we tend to call them, are actually hidden skills. But this is a little bit of both. She speaks and writes Japanese, and she translated a small collection of 10 poems by a classical Japanese poet named Shikishi, sometimes called Princess Shikishi, who lived 900 years ago. She was born in 1150, died in 1201, roughly. Alice did this really beautiful little handmade book that includes both the original Japanese and her English versions, and it's apparently every copy is slightly different. She made it, hand stitched, and she chose special paper for it. I mean, it's quite beautiful. I am very, I covet my own copy of it. So this is number 9. This is number 9 in her book. I don't know if it's numbered. I don't know how Shikishi's poems are arranged, but this is number 9 in her book. These are very, very short. I think they were originally haiku, and she's translated them into 3-line poems in English that do not follow the 575 syllable count, as is a source of much controversy in the rattle world, as Ethan has informed me. Maybe we'll cover again on another occasion. This is number 9 by Princess Shikishi, translated by Alice. My string of jewels, if you must break, then break. This relentless longing is more than I can bear. Boy, that's really clean, and it seems to be almost completely without guile, but it's quite skillful. My string of jewels, if you must break, then break. This relentless longing is more than I can bear. I'm not big on typography, but it is quite nice that if you must break, comma, lined break, then break. The string of jewels seems to be threatening to break, and she says, well, if you're going to break, then break. But then the haiku, I guess, traditionally pairs two images or pairs two things in a kind of an implicit metaphor. And the other half of that metaphor, this relentless longing is more than I can bear, is nice because it tugs in the opposite direction, right? If a relentless longing that won't quite give is the opposite of having a precious thing that might break, right? You don't want the string of jewels to break. The longing, you want that to break, but you want to gain something good, right? Rather than losing something precious. So it pulls in the opposite direction of the original image. And even that is more than I can bear suggests that just the weight of this string of jewels, the weight of this longing itself as a thing that has to be suspended from the speaker is too much. Yeah, it's very, very clean, very minimal. It's almost nothing there, but I think it's quite fine. My string of jewels, if you must break, then break. This relentless longing is more than I can bear. Very early on, Sabrina Ora Mark had a really lovely comment about Ryan Wilson's poetry. I can't remember the precise phrasing, but she said, he turns his pockets out to show you all his influences, which is a sort of the suggestion being that he's so humble in writing his poems that he won't let himself take credit for anything. Everything he shows you is from another poet whose work he loves. And I think Alice, that's as true of Alice as I think it's true of anyone. I submitted to a Rattle chapbook contest. Rattle does a chapbook contest every year. They publish 3 chapbooks. They send them out with the issues of their magazine. And I'm used to getting, because basically anytime you submit to Rattle, you also subscribe to Rattle for like half a year or whatever. And so I'm used to getting a lot of these. They don't come, I think, with every issue, but they come with like many, if not most issues. And crucially, the chapbook prize has a pretty big purse as poetry purses go. And I had forgotten that I'd submitted to this prize. I think I mentioned it on the Substack chat, and so I can imagine being like very annoyed if I told you about this prize on the Substack chat, and you said, "Oh, hey, I'll enter that," and then I won it. Like, that would annoy me if it had happened to me, and I'm sure it annoyed some listeners, for which I apologize. The 3 winners, I was one of them. I am very grateful to Rattle and Tim and Katie, who are editors at Rattle. Tim is the big guy, and Katie's just as formidable as a person. I think she's an associate editor at Rattle. They're going to come. They're very generously. They're going to come on SLEERICKETS. So I'm excited to have a conversation with them. If you are a Rattle person or interested in Rattle and you have questions for them, send them in to me. I've already solicited some from the Secret Show subscribers, and Ethan sent me a slew. And if you have any others, send them in. I'm not sure exactly. We're going to talk sometime in the next month or two, so you have a little bit of time. I'm very grateful to them, and I have a great deal of respect for them. But this means I'm doing the exact thing I always complain about, which is publishing 2 books of poetry like a year apart. I mean, this is not a full book of poetry, but I published Midlife in 2024, and this will be coming out in 2025. And that's really, I'm always annoyed when I see people who have lots of books of poems published year after year after year after year. I tend to think people should publish less. The good news is these poems will probably mostly appear in my next full-length collection, which I expect to come out in 2034 or somewhere around then. If you submit to Rattle and therefore subscribe to Rattle, you'll get a copy if you do it, if your timing is right. 7 of the poems they're 15 poems. 7 of them, I think, are available online, one place or another. Most of the rest have been published somewhere else, but only in print, and then 1 is not published before. I tried to make it at least be good, right? I tried to at least follow my advice and make it at least be good. I will mention now, and I'll mention again later, that I have an idea. And it could be a terrible idea, like many are that I have, but it occurred to me as something that maybe would be of interest to some of you. for this one time, maybe I'll open it up to everybody. I think in the future, I'm only going to do this for Secret Show subscribers, if this turns out to be a decent idea. But my thought is this. If you would like to send me a poem and have me analyze it very frankly, not analyze it. Not analyze it. I don't want to do a close reading of it. I don't want to explain what it's about. I don't want to pry into your head and figure out what's the deep, true meaning. No, not that. If you would like me to offer a criticism of it as a poem, technically in a writerly way, how it is doing and what it is doing, or what it is trying to do, and how it might do it better. Try me. I don't know how many people might send in poems. I don't know how many I might end up talking about in this way, but it's something I noticed about myself recently. So when I'm making food for the girls or doing, various kitchen chores, changing laundry and that kind of stuff, I will sometimes watch chess analysis videos. I watch a lot of Gotham Chess, who's I think he's like the biggest chess streamer and YouTuber. So you can, actually, I don't think he's the biggest streamer. I think Hikaru Nakamura is the biggest streamer, or maybe But Gotham Chess, Levi Rossmann is the biggest chess YouTuber. He's very entertaining and he's very good. I mean, I think he's an international master, but he's like 1,000 miles beyond where I'll ever get if I devoted the rest of my life to getting better at chess, which I will not do. So I enjoy his videos. What I have found, though, is that the ones I end up turning to most often are not his analyses of the highest level games played. I do watch plenty of those, but when the chess is played at the highest level, the truth is I can only understand it so much. What I find much more valuable for my own purposes are his videos in which he will analyze the games of his own subscribers. And sometimes he will play against them, and sometimes he will just look at their games and talk about them. But it's really helpful because they're playing at a level that is comparable to what I'm playing at least, or a range at least that intersects with the range that I'm playing at. And so I can learn much more about how to actually play a little bit better by watching his analyses of their games than by watching his analyses of Hans Niemann's latest game, right? That's at a different, that's something else. Even watching him talk about his own games, it's still so far beyond my understanding that I can just sort of appreciate it the way I might appreciate watching a game like a professional sports game, right? But when he talks about, when he brings his expert knowledge to a beginner or intermediate level game, then I can actually learn something about how I can improve. So I don't know, two things I really don't know. One is if any of you would want to have your work talked about in that way in public. And two is if you would think I'm the person to do it. And so you might not. Your answer might be like, hey, that's a great idea. I would love to have Joshua Megan do that, right? I would love to have Shane McRae do that. I would love to have Maury Creech do that. I'd love to have Philip Metris do that. But like, fuck you, Matthew. I don't want to hear your stupid opinion. In which case, totally fair. Totally fair. Maybe at some point I'll bring one of them on to see if they want to do a close, again, not a close reading, not an analysis, but a technical assessment of this is the thing. We're going to get to this question of bullshit later, but an interpretation really later. But it is so hard to talk about how one actually writes poems because most of the moment-to-moment decision making is not about larger themes. I mean, for me, I think Elijah is different. He believes in sort of themes and theses and the development of a moral and these kind of things. I don't. I do a lot of this very intuitively, and I have a fair amount of knowledge built up over time, and I have a lot of rules of thumb, and I have a lot of precedent, but I also, at a line-by-line, word-by-word level, it is it's a lot of it it's such a specific case-by-case adjustment that it's very hard to speak about in the abstract. And speaking about it in a really finished, accomplished, great poem is also harder, because in order to do it, you basically have to come up with counterfactuals. You have to show how it could be worse in various ways. So again, I don't know how much, chess is a much more quantitative it's not an art form, a quantitative skill set of knowledge than poetry is, and I don't know how you would rate me in comparison with someone like Levi Grossman, but I thought for at least some of you it might be valuable. And I think that in part because a lot of you have written to me privately asking for something like that. And what I thought would help in this case is that it is like, it's hard to know when to give people this kind of feedback. Like I feel like it's like converting to Judaism. Like you have to ask and be denied several times before you finally believe that somebody's really gonna want to hear honest feedback. And like, in fact, I had somebody send me a book and ask for my honest feedback. Or sorry, I bought a book, read it, told the guy that I read it and appreciated it, and then he said, please send me your honest feedback. And I showed the email to my wife and she said, oh no, do not do that. So it's hard to know how frank and how technical to be. And something I certainly experience often with Cameron is like reading like submissions for LM and thinking, hey, this is close, but there's some things that I want to fiddle with. There's some ways in which he's falling short, or he's tying his own shoelaces together and doesn't realize it. And my thought is there are only two decent ways to handle that. One is, if I'm pretty sure I would really want to take one of these poems, then I will write to the poet and say, hey, how would you feel about an editorial discussion about a few suggestions? Like I will ask that in that case, because it is much more of a specific question of like, in order to get to the point of publication. Or if I'm not going to take it, or if I feel like it would take a little bit too much of a deep engagement critically, then I will just send a very polite rejection, and I will resist my impulse to offer a critique, because a rejection never needs an explanation. Well, not never. In most cases, a rejection does not need an explanation, and it almost never needs an unsolicited explanation, right? I hate when I get those, when people say, hey, I'm going to say no to this, and let me tell you why. Go fuck yourself. I don't want to hear. No, just say no. So I thought this might be an opportunity to anonymously talk about some subscriber, listener poems. I wouldn't use names, and I would just be talking about them technically as like things that you might make better, or how they are working, how they're not working, what they're trying to do, and how much they're succeeding, and how they might succeed a little more. That's the idea. I think for these, again, I'm not sure how this would work exactly. I'm not sure if this would end up being only on the Secret Show. If it would only, my guess is it would be a perk for subscribers to the Secret Show, but I don't know how many people are going to submit, in which case I might need to make it a perk for motherfuckers of the arts. I don't know. But for now, I will just say, try me. If I get flooded, then we'll see. But try me. If you would be interested in having me talk about a poem of yours on the show, try me. I would do it anonymously, and I would not reprint the text in the show notes, so that you could still publish it elsewhere. That is fair game still to publish elsewhere. So in an audio format, I think no editor in his right mind would be a brat about that. And, if you feel anxiety, as I have in the past, just say it. Just say, hey, somebody talked about a version of this on a podcast, but the print is not available anywhere. If that interests you, send your poem to SLEERICKETS@gmail.com, and we'll see what happens. I don't know where this is going to go, but we'll see what happens, and it could be interesting. All right. In watching some of these chess analysis videos, I noticed that one of the advertisements that kept popping up over and over again was an advertisement for some new AI assistant program. I can't remember which brand it was, if it was Siri or Alexa or some other thing. They all give me the fucking heebie-jeebies. But the advertisement was something about it I found even more like dispiriting than usual. And it was like a woman was having a party and she asked it to give her some ideas for party themes and asked it to give her some ideas for the names for the cocktails that she could make that would be consistent with the theme. And this was disappointing and disheartening. But then what really kind of killed me was that at the end you realize it's a book club. And the last thing she says to her AI assistant is, give me some discussion questions for Moby Dick. Oh, like, which is not to say, I have not read Moby Dick still, I need to read it. I'm not suggesting that it is not a challenging book. I'm not suggesting that people might not want some help thinking of there's something so depressing about that to me. And yet, watching this advertisement that kept coming up, I thought, well, why is this doing this to me? Why is this sending, is it because I'm assuming it's because I'm logged into my YouTube account. I'm assuming it's reading something in my history and saying, hey, how about this to you? Unless just everybody is seeing exactly this ad, which is which is possible. But then I thought, well, I'm watching a chess YouTuber video, and in the video, he talks frequently about the computer's recommendations. Because if you're analyzing a chess game today and you're not using a chess engine, you're not really analyzing it seriously today. You're just not, because engines have opened up the game. They have inarguably contributed to chess, to how chess players play today, to how we understand the game, to analyses of the game, the ways of play. It's just, they have made it better. They have expanded the game. We understand it better because of computers. It's really indisputable in the case of chess. Although, interestingly, when he analyzes subscriber games and he talks about the chess engine, he will very often say the top engine move is X. However, you should ignore that. Of course, you should ignore it in the sense that you should never be looking at the engine while you are playing a game. Right? That's cheating. But this is not a useful way to think for most players at most levels. And in fact, unless you are Hans Niemann on the best day of his life, who's a top-level grandmaster who is known for playing like a chess engine when he's at his best and when he's not melting down and throwing a hissy fit, which he does more often than not. If you're not Magnus Carlsen, if you're not Pragnananda Ramesh Babu, if you're not Gukesh Domaraju, if you're not Hikaru Nakamura, if you're not Ding Liren, you don't really need to worry about the chess engine because it's not really affecting your level of the game that much. And it is going to offer you an optimal move that is only optimal if every move that follows it is also optimal. Whereas the move he will recommend, this human YouTube chess influencer, he will recommend a move that is going to allow you to play intuitively, that's going to look like a human move that you can then play in a way that will not require you to memorize 10,000 branches of possible moves in order to get the right move 20 moves later. But again, it sent me back to this question of whether or not AI can be helpful for poetry. And I think regardless of the answer to that question, I will probably never use AI in my writing. I find it so bone-chilling as a prospect. But also, it has thus far not been good at writing poetry. It is, I did a whole episode on an in-depth study of AI poetry, ChatGPT poetry. I can link to that. Go listen to it. I went into it in great detail. I think the study was deeply flawed and did not ultimately demonstrate much of anything. except that ChatGPT likes to write poems in rhyming ballad stand. Like that it writes ballads. It turns everybody into a balladeer. But I think more significantly, there's this principle that I learned from a little book my dad had in Atlanta that was like a little cartoon book by this guy named Jono Hay. But it's this principle that it comes from a mathematician named Richard Hamming. And the principle is you get what you measure. You get what you measure. What he means is that when you choose what to measure, that determines what the result of your measurement will be. He does a kind of a more detailed analysis of why IQ tests are sort of fundamentally dubious because of how they are constructed, like how the concept of IQ is constructed. But the much simpler example he gives in order to illustrate the concept is that you take a net. He said there was some study where people took a net, they used the net to they swept up a bunch of fish out of a body of water, and then they looked at the fish in the net and they measured them, and there were fish of all different sizes, but they determined they took the smallest fish and they said, well, no fish smaller than this appears in the net. Therefore, this is the smallest size of fish that appears in this body of water. Now, the very obvious problem with this conclusion is that the net has holes in it. So, in fact, it was only ever going to catch fish that were larger than its holes were. And if you used a net of different size holes, you would get a different size smallest fish. The slightly more entertaining example that Jono Hay uses in his book of cartoons, Big Ideas, Little Pictures, which is where I encountered this idea for the first time, is the example of fighter planes coming back after dogfights during a war. And the engineers examine the planes that have survived the dogfights, and they found that the bullet holes tend to crop up in certain portions of the plane. And so they say, well, since most of the bullets are hitting these portions of the plane, we need to increase the armoring of the planes in these spots so they will be better protected against the spots where the bullets land. And of course, the problem with that conclusion is that the only planes that are coming back for them to examine are the planes that didn't go down in the dogfight. And so what you're actually measuring is not where do most of the bullets land. What you're measuring is what is the location of bullet holes that a plane can survive and not crash, right? Because the planes that got hit in other spots crashed. So this like very clearly, I think, lines up with the whole AI problem, right? In chess, they trained AIs to play chess games. And AlphaZero famously was not taught any chess rules or fundamentals. It didn't get any book knowledge. All it got taught were the rules of chess, and then it was taught to play itself 500 billion times in order to figure out what the best way to play was. And it came up with a very alien way of playing. I think since then, Stockfish is now these engines keep getting improved over time. I believe Stockfish is the top chess engine right at this moment. There was another one that came out recently that was very formidable. I forget. Leela. I think Leela was its name. But I believe Stockfish is the top engine at the moment. I could be wrong. But AlphaZero learned how to play by playing. And the thing about playing chess is there's a winner and a loser. Or there's a draw. There are three outcomes. Black wins, white wins, or there's a draw. That's what happens. And so if what you want is to win, and if not win, then not lose, right? If you want is to win, and after winning, you want to draw, if those are your preferences, and you can tell the machine those are your preferences, it can test any strategy. It can test any move by playing games. And there is a definite result at the end of those games. One of those three results will come about. We don't have a test like that for poetry, right? When you measure chess engines, you're measuring for winning, losing, or drawing. When you're measuring poems, all you're really measuring for is this a poem that a person might write? And so the reason AI poetry is slop is that most poetry is slop. There's no test. It's not being tested against anything. I hypothesized in the past that a poetry writing engine would have to be equipped with a body that died and the consciousness that it was going to die. And if it could do that, then maybe it could write poetry. But maybe a simpler standard would be it would have to be able to test the effect of its poems somehow. By some standard. Pick a standard. Any standard. Did it make somebody cry? Did it change the political landscape? Like whatever you want to make the standard. Is it memorable? Did more, if it could test memorability, then it would learn how to write memorable as fuck poems. I still think there's a kind of a problem with chess engines making, at least based on large language models, which are really just sort of a probability game based on what is the most likely word to come next, given a various sets of variables. I think there is still sort of a problem, as Carmine Starnino talked about, with sort of like with the original observation. Not like deep wisdom, because poetry doesn't need to have like original wisdom, but it does need to like liken things convincingly. Right? Like it does need to say things that ring true. And it is hard for me to imagine how a large language model could come up with something that really rang true. Although, who knows? But really what it needs is it needs a scythe, it needs a standard, it needs death, it needs losing to be possible. Right now it's not possible, and that's why it's just coming up with slop. But it's not coming up with, it's not just AI slop because AI produces slop. It's AI slop because humans produce slop. Human poets produce slop. All right. The other thing that happened was Jonathan did an interview with A.O. Scott, who's a big-time movie critic, now poetry critic, book critic, writing for the New York Times for forever. Jonathan did an interview with him. It's in Slate. It's delightful and engrossing, and Jonathan's a very good interviewer. My only complaint is I just wish it were longer, because I happen to have inside knowledge that Jonathan spoke with Scott for quite a long time and had to compress a lot in order to fit it into a Slate article. I imagine a lot more of that conversation is pretty fascinating. But there was a moment that that stood out, and it stood out even, I think Jonathan even mentioned it to me before I read the interview. And it's interesting. Scott introduces kind of an interesting term. So I'll read the relevant passage here. Jonathan challenged Scott on a specific claim he made in an analysis of a George Oppen poem. He put the M dashes on either side of the word child. Oppen did in the poem. So M dash child M dash appears in the poem. And Scott said that this is like a hug, like arms hugging the child. Like the word child is a child, and the M dashes are arms hugging the child. I hate everything about that claim. It just seems like I hate everything about it. Everything. I hate like thinking about typography, like being precious with the typography in that way. I hate making that kind of supposition about like what is intended secretly by how it's presented on the page. It's corny to me. It's all like that's where you would reach for. Like I also like, even if I were to try to speculate about what M dashes around the word child were supposed to look like, arms hugging an actual child would be the 50,000th thing I would guess. I hate the whole thing. Jonathan, very gently and very politely, in a much more professional fashion than I would have, challenged this claim of Scott's. He said, I don't know about this. And Scott's response was, part of that is that I think there is a place, and I've always believed this, going back to my own schooling, there is always a place for the extravagant reading. There's always a place for the extravagant reading. Jonathan says that's a great term. It is a great term. And it immediately is sort of a winning term. Like I heard that and I thought, ooh, yeah. Well, like when Jonathan told me that Scott had said that, I was like, that's kind of it. Like, I suddenly kind of feel more sympathetic to this idea. I like the idea of an extravagant reading. So Scott goes on. He says, well, I stole it. There's a great essay by Neil Hertz called Two Extravagant Teachings, which is about being in a seminar and doing a close reading of a poem. The professor is making these increasingly outrageous claims about it and saying to the students, how far can I go with this? How far will you let me go? The argument of the essay is that the extravagance is the only way that you can latch on to what's really there, by going too far in whatever speculative direction. And this is, he says, what he was doing with it was part of his designer. I think, he said one of the designers was the one who suggested that that's the child holding out its arms. Maybe it's the child's arms. I still hate it. So I read this essay. I was interested. I looked up Neil Hertz's essay, Two Extravagant Teachings. I don't think that the argument of the essay is really that extravagant readings are the only way to find out what's really going on in a poem. I don't think that's actually what Hertz is saying. However, to Scott's credit, he read this essay, as he says, back in his own schooling. He read this essay probably decades ago. And the thing that really stood out to him about it was this scene in which the teacher is saying, how far can I go with this? How far will you let me go? And that is the most memorable moment in the essay. And extravagant reading is extravagant teaching, extravagant reading. Like this is a kind of a cool concept. And so Scott sort of plucked out of the essay a compelling idea, even though I think the essay itself is actually quite critical of the professor who's doing this. It calls him misogynistic and says that in fact, given the circumstances, none of the students would have been able to object. And it's a complex treatment of this teacher's argument, Wasserman, but it's not, I think, just an endorsement of extravagant readings. I think that's inaccurate. But Scott is doing what I think most people do, including me, when they read like the Symposium. I read the Symposium, and it's about all these famous old Greek guys arguing about what love is, and Plato has a very famous argument about what love is that I find like deeply concerning and even, arguably like psychopathic. And Aristophanes has a story about where love comes from that is exquisite and is maybe the most indelible thing Aristophanes ever wrote. Like, it's way better than his plays are. It's the story of the origin of love, the story of the androgyne. Origin of Love, I think, is the John Mitchell Cameron rendering of it in Hedwig and the Angry Inch. Great story about the androgyne, about, once upon a time, human beings were actually, we were twice as big as we are now. And some of us were half man and half woman. Some of us were all, man and man. Some of us were woman and woman. And we rolled around, we were round, and we were big, and we were beautiful and powerful. And eventually we challenged the gods, and Zeus punished us by using his lightning bolt to split us in two. And ever since then, each of us has sought out his missing half, his other half. And sex is our desperate, doomed attempt to reunite with our other half. Holy shit, what a great story. Now, the point of that story in the Symposium, the point of Plato's inclusion of that story in the Symposium, it's Socrates who has this story about I forget what he calls his version of love, but his version, Diotima, goddess, who he says instructs him. But Plato's the one writing the Symposium, the whole thing, and or at least recording it. And the reason he includes Aristophanes' speech, apart from the fact that probably it did really happen in sort of this language, Plato includes it as a wrong answer. Socrates' answer is the right answer. Aristophanes' answer is the wrong answer. And I do think that I don't believe in soulmates. I don't believe we have an other half out there. But holy shit, it's a great story. And it's the only thing most people remember from the Symposium because it's the best story in there. So I totally respect Scott's misremembering of this essay because he just took out the coolest bit, and that's what stuck with him, which is like, of course, what happens when you read an essay and then you remember it 30 years later. I do think that there's sort of reading it, this is an essay from 1982. It ran in Yale French Studies, even though I don't think there's a single mention of French literature in here. It also feels very Freudian. Like he seems to believe that the he talks about how crazy it is that teachers get really, really upset about plagiarism. Like the whole first half of the essay is all about plagiarism and how mad teachers get about plagiarism. And he thinks that what is really happening when teachers get mad about plagiarism is that in some basically like Freudian sense, the student is, by replacing what is supposed to be original work with fundamentally derivative work, he's really kind of exposing and putting pressure on the teacher, on the basically derivative nature of teaching. And so he's pricking the teacher's anxiety about his own inauthenticity, about how his own profession is really just itself a form of plagiarism. That's like a cool concept. It doesn't at all ring true to me, because I remember teaching and feeling like not just annoyed at plagiarism, but like on some level offended and kind of angry about it. And what angers me about it is the same thing that angers me about AI writing. And it's the same reason that like I really can't endorse using AI writing for anything that you want someone else to read, because it's a bait and switch. Because when I think reading is an intimate act. When I choose to read your work, you've said to me, hey, I think this is worth your time. I think you should spend the time and take the care to read this. And I've said, okay, I will spend the time and take the care to read this. And it's not easy. Reading's not easy. And so I dive in, I engage, and then to learn halfway through that the person who asked you to read it didn't even write it. Nobody wrote it. Or somebody, he borrowed it. I mean, AI writing is far more offensive to me than plagiarism. Like, at least you're stealing somebody else who's a better writer, stealing his work, and I can read that better writer's works. He wrote it. I'm engaging with him, even if I'm not really engaging with you. But with AI writing, it's like being seduced by somebody, and then halfway through, you realize that you're not actually having sex with that person. You're having sex with like a rubber vagina. Like, you've just been like, oh, I said I wanted to do this with you. I acted like I wanted to do this with you. But then I'm actually just going to let an object stand in for my part of this interaction. And I'm going to let you basically do something alone by yourself with a thing that I didn't think it was worth my time to write the thing that I asked you to read. That's what I find so offensive about plagiarism, and even more offensive about AI writing. So yeah, he's pretty critical of Wasserman, who's the guy who said, "What can I get away with? What do you let me do?" And I think like what the scene of the teacher saying, "How much can I get away with? What will you let me? Will you stop me?" That scene reminded me of a lecture I saw Paul Muldoon give years and years ago at Hopkins. He gave a big annual lecture, big payment for this. I mean, the university pays a lot of money for this lecture. And like, I don't care about the university's money, but like, it's a big honor, and it was a big opportunity. And Muldoon came, and he just showed utter contempt for the audience. Just could not have looked down his nose any further at us. And he did one of his, Muldoon is the master of extravagant readings. He talked about a couple of poems, and he basically just spun them off into the opportunity to talk about how much he hated the Catholic Church and how bad the Catholic Church had treated his sister, which it sounds like they had. And like, the Catholic Church in Ireland did some really fucked up shit. I mean, they did fucked up shit elsewhere as well, but like, the complaints with the church were valid. It just wasn't, he just wasn't doing us or the poetry the honor of actually treating it at face value. And it was a sort of a pronouncement that it didn't even seem like he believed it. It would be one thing if he was just a crazy man. Like when Harold Bloom gets real crazy, at least I think he really believes his crazy interpretation. And that doesn't mean it's valuable, but it doesn't feel disrespectful in the same way as when you're saying, hey, I don't really believe this, but you hogs like this slop, don't you? Here's some more slop for you hogs. Eat this up. I don't believe it. But I'll come up with some stuff to say for you to take in. To me, that feels very contemptuous. The Wasserman example, where he's at the table with the student saying, stop me, how much will you let me get away with? That feels a little disingenuous, right? Because it feels like he's saying, I don't really believe this. But on the other hand, he seems excited, and it's an invitation. It seems like it still has pedagogical value because what he's saying to the students is, come join me. Let's come see what it's like to read this poem in this way. Let's come see what we could find out if we tried to read it in this way. That feels to me both like much more respectful of your audience and much more potentially critically valuable than an extravagant reading that is merely an extravagant reading. And while like A.O. Scott seems like a totally good guy, and I don't think he's writing contemptuously at all. I mean, he seems to have a great deal of respect for his reader. The Oppen thing, the child's arms of the M dashes, to me that feels a little bit like, yeah, fuck it, why not? I'll throw that in there. Like, he says he thinks Oppen might really been thinking that. Sorry, he says, I don't know that Oppen wasn't thinking that. To me, I don't know. I think it's still like you've got to either really believe in extravagant reading or there's got to be something valuable coming out of it. I do think there's value to extravagant readings or extravagant interpretations when artists perform them all the time, usually in the privacy of their own lives. Like I talked to Alice and Elijah briefly about doing this with Aunt Imogen recently. I read this poem that Brian Berger loves of E.A. Robinson's Aunt Imogen, and I loved it, read it, reread it, and I was just obsessed with it. And I only realized after several readings and after rereading Brian's commentary on it, I only realized then that I was imposing on the poem a whole other layer that wasn't really there. And that was not, you couldn't really find it in the text. Where you could find it was in my own anxiety about myself at the moment that I happened to read that poem. But it was helpful to me in thinking about my own writing. It made me want to write things in a certain way. And I think like that's a very dumb guy level of kind of playing out Bloom's anxiety of influence, right? You misread a better poet's work, and then it helps stir you in the direction of becoming better yourself. So I think like extravagant readings can be really valuable, but I kind of don't believe in extravagant readings for extravagant reading's sake. And I think that starts to feel a little bit contemptuous. It feels a little bit like Muldoon at that fucking lecture. Maybe the question about is not so much like, is the reading valid? Like, is it deeply true in some Platonic sense? Is this like fundamentally what the poet is speaking about? Or fundamentally what he should have been speaking about, or fundamentally what the words mean, whether or not he knew they meant them, or fundamentally what he intended for them to mean. Maybe the question is like, is this reading a waste of time? Or is it getting us somewhere? Is it churning up some possibilities? Is it presenting a new path open to us? Is it an invitation to students? Is it provoking also fruitful readings in some other way? If it's a waste of time, then the follow-up question is, whose time is it wasting? If it's just wasting your time because you're sort of working out your own interpretations, that's fine. If you know you don't believe it and you're imposing it on others and it's a waste of time, then it bothers me. I also was reminded, because I edited the conversation with Tristram Fane Saunders from last week. I had that conversation with him a few weeks ago, but I edited it last week, and I was reminded of this brief mention of on bullshit. So this is an essay. It was a 1986 essay. It was then republished in 2005 as a little teeny book. I mean, it's like a medium length essay. So as a book, it's one of those like, is this water books? Like what is water? Whatever the David Foster Wallace commencement address is called. It's not really a book, but it got published as a book. So it's called On Bullshit. It's by Harry Frankfurt, who's an American philosopher. I think he's an American philosopher. It was. He died just like a year or two ago. So he wrote this essay in 1986 called On Bullshit. It's a really good essay. It's very good. It's very much worth reading. It came up in my conversation with Tristram because I mentioned it in the context of poetry reviews. And so what I'd done is I'd done the very intellectually lazy thing of having heard people refer to this essay and summarize the main thesis of it. And then I thought, well, I don't know that I'm ever going to bother to read it because I already know the main thesis of it and whatever. But, when I heard myself mention it on the podcast, I felt guilty because I thought I've mentioned this thing that I haven't actually read, as if I might have read it, right? I might have given you the impression that I read it. So I went and read it. And I had the thesis right, as it had been reported, but it's a little bit richer than that. So the central thesis of this essay is that the bullshitting is not exactly the same thing as lying. He takes this definition given by a guy named Max Black. It's Max Black is defining humbug, and Frankfurt says that humbug seems to be pretty similar to bullshit as we understand it. And the thing about humbug or bullshit is that it's not exactly lying, but it's sort of it's like lying. It's a little. I think Black says it stops just short of lying. And so Frankfurt points out that whenever somebody lies, he's actually lying about two things. He's lying about what he's lying about, as he says, if he says that he has money he doesn't have, he's lying both about what's in his pocket, but he's also lying about what's in his mind. He's telling you something that's not true, and he's telling you implicitly that he believes it, which is why if you do believe something and you tell it to somebody, but it's not true, that's not really a lie. Now, it may be bad, maybe plenty of other things, but it's not really a lie. It's something else. It's a different kind of mistake. Lying is telling something you know not to be the truth. But he says that what's interesting then about lying is that the liar, like the truth teller, is concerned with what is true. And he's saying what he's saying with a special regard for what is actually true. Even if he's just saying the opposite of what's true. He needs to know what's true, or at least think he knows what's true. It matters to him what's really true, even if he's telling a lie. But he says this is not really the case with bullshit or humbug. This is, I think, a particularly good example he gives. Consider a 4th of July orator who goes on bombastically about our great and blessed country, whose founding fathers, under divine guidance, created a new beginning for mankind. This is Frankfurt, this is surely humbug. As Black's account suggests, the orator is not lying. He would be lying only if it were his intention to bring about in his audience beliefs which he himself regards as false, concerning such matters as whether our country is great, whether it is blessed, whether the founders had divine guidance, and whether what they did was in fact to create a new beginning for mankind. But the orator does not really care what his audience thinks about the founding fathers, or about the role of the deity in our country's history, or the like. He is not trying to deceive anyone concerning American history. What he cares about is what people think of him. This is the point of bullshit. What distinguishes the bullshitter from the liar is that the bullshitter doesn't care whether what he's saying is true or not. He might be telling the truth some of the time, but it doesn't matter to him. And he makes the further point, which is, I think, quite damning, which is that he says, both in lying and in telling the truth, people are guided by their beliefs concerning the way things are. For this reason, telling lies does not tend to unfit a person for telling the truth in the same way that bullshitting tends to. All the while you're telling lies, you are paying attention to what you think is true. But if you spend enough time bullshitting, you have learned not to pay attention to whether the things you say are true. And therefore, it is actually harder to start telling the truth if you are a bullshitter than if you are a compulsive liar. Because he says that that one way of thinking about bullshit would be that it's sort of careless speech, just rambling on. But he says this is not really true, because there's a lot of bullshit, and he gives the example of advertising. He says, in these realms there are exquisitely sophisticated craftsmen who, with the help of advanced and demanding techniques of market research, of opinion polling, of public opinion polling, of psychological testing, and so forth, dedicate themselves tirelessly to getting every word and image they produce exactly right. Advertising writers and political speechwriters as well, because what they're saying might be true or it might not be true. It doesn't matter. The point is they want you to buy it, or they want you to vote for this candidate. And this really, really reminded me of poetry. The thing that he does not dig into, Because he ends up kind of coming to I think a conclusion that is, it may be a little bit outdated, but I think it also may just be sort of fundamentally misplaced. He says that one of the reasons there's so much bullshit now is the rise of relativism, the belief that nothing is really true, or that all truth is just a matter of opinion. And I know this is a perennial complaint of conservatives too, and especially used to be. Again, this was written in 1986. I don't know, man. I think relativism is out these days. Like, I think everybody is way too certain. If anything, I feel like I am more of a relativist than I ever used to be, and in that way am not. I don't feel at home in most political camps or most parts of, most sides of any public debate. Yeah, I think relativism is out. I think moral clarity, to use the now journalistic cliche, is in. He does, though, make the point that what compounds some of this is the widespread conviction that it is the responsibility of a citizen in a democracy to have opinions about everything. He says that because of relativism, people retreat from the need from the search for correctness or accuracy, and they retreat to the search for sincerity. And then he says, convinced that reality has no inherent nature which he might hope to identify as the truth about things, he devotes himself to being true to his own nature. Our natures are indeed elusively insubstantial, notoriously less stable and less inherent than natures of other things, and insofar as this is the case, sincerity itself is bullshit. That's the great closing line of this essay. Very much truth to that. There's very much truth to that, and truth to a certain obsession with being true to one's own nature today, which I think is usually an error. But I think the point that I was sort of more interested in, that I think he does a little bit overlook in examples like the one of the politician praising the founding fathers. The politician says, our great and blessed country, whose founding fathers under divine guidance created a new beginning for mankind. So the points of fact there are whether our country is great and blessed, whether our country is great, whether it's blessed, whether the founding fathers had divine guidance, and whether what they created was a new beginning for mankind. Now, what all of those values or qualities or claims have in common, apart from the fact that the orator doesn't give a shit about them, and doesn't even really care if the audience gives a shit about them, what they all have in common is that they're completely unverifiable. And so what occurs to me is that, he says that basically once you start to have insincere claims about verifiable conditions, this is bullshit, right? Insincere in the sense that it might be true, it might not be, but you don't necessarily mean what you're saying. You're just saying it. And once you're saying things that might or may not be true and you don't care, that's bullshit. But I think a deeper problem is that a lot of the places where we encounter bullshit the most are arenas concerned with unverifiable conditions, including a lot of politics, a lot of religion, and a lot of the arts. And so the problem is that even sincere claims, even conscientious claims about unverifiable conditions tend toward this funny, mushy phenomenon whereby others take these claims with a big grain of bullshit. Right? Like when I hear somebody make a completely unverifiable claim, I tend to say okay, sure, I'm not going to fight you. But also I both don't give a lot of credence to that claim, and I don't know if I give a lot of credence to your claim of it, particularly if you know it's unverifiable and I know it's unverifiable, and that any conversation about it is going to be fundamentally unverifiable. Right? If somebody is making, I do this in good faith and with a generous heart, but when somebody tells me hey, I believe in heaven and hell, and that what we do here is going to be rewarded or punished on the cosmic scale, I say, okay. And when somebody says my fundamental true gender identity is X, And that's what I need to, that's what I need to be true to, and that's what I need to, pursue in my life in this way or that way. I say, like, okay. But what I think happens is that the more people have conversations like this, and the more we make, however sincere, however conscientious, claims about totally unverifiable conditions, the less likely we are to take each other seriously or to take ourselves seriously, because there's just no test for any of it. And like, poetry is a great example of this. There's no penalty on any level of saying something, of making a superlative claim about a poem or a poet. This is why I get very bored very quickly with arguments about, like, this poet is good, but is he major? Is he great? I think, fucking, what are we talking about? Like, not only can I not take the claim seriously, but because I can't take the claim seriously, I can't take the person making the claim seriously. And this is where I mentioned luxury beliefs on an episode. I can't remember if it was in the Secret or the main feed, and how I think it's a deeply half-smart idea. And I got some resistance to that. I had a more than one listener say, hey, it's all well and good for you to believe that, the universe is fundamentally empty and meaningless, and all of our choices are guided by chance and physics and biology. But people who are poor, people who are struggling, people who are less educated, it's really important for them to believe that hard work pays off, and that there's a reward waiting for them, and the universe is the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Those beliefs are really important to people who aren't as lucky as you. And so, for you to poo-poo them in public is really irresponsible. And I take that claim seriously. I completely disagree with it. I think I have a deep allergy to the noble lie, which was Plato, again, advocated a noble lie. He said we should tell everybody that it was a complicated part of it that had to do with, like, bronze and silver and golden men. But the big golden lie, the big noble lie was, if you are brave and selfless in your lifetime, then after you die, you will be rewarded in the afterlife. He said it is really important that we teach our warriors this, so they will go fight bravely in battle and die. I mean, this is Valhalla. Right? Go die with a weapon in your hand, with forward-facing wounds, and you will go to paradise. He says that is a lie, and it's a lie it's really important that we tell our people in order to get them to do what's best for them, and more importantly, for the polis as a whole. And I just have, like, a deep, reflexively negative response to that. I also think that, like, we have too much in our culture argue about an infinitely deferred imagined audience. This is the whole concept of a horse race discussion in politics. Is that it's not about what I think of the candidate, it's about what the people think of the candidate, and what, and this is where I think the concept of paternalism in medicine, Joanna has talked about how there was in an earlier age of medicine, this is the age of the lobotomies and the euthanasia of the Cyclops child, and heavy use of sanatoriums and involuntary admissions, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and involuntary electroconvulsive therapy. Like, there was an age of heavy paternalism in medicine, and there were ages of even more paternalism before that, right? And so more recently, doctors have swung away from paternalism, and the result of this is sometimes kind of comical. It is often, I thankfully my medical health is pretty stable these days. I take a fistful of pills every day, but there was a while ago, 10 years or so ago, I had, like, a slew of surgeries and, like, complicated things and scares and questions and tests and this and that. And I would very often be confronted with a decision that had a lot of complex elements to it. And the doctor would say, well, what do you want to do? And my response was like, well, what do you think I should do? I'm not the doctor. I'm glad I have to consent to this. I'm glad I have to finally say yes, but, like, I don't want to have to come up with the solution. Like, tell me, is this a good choice? Well, they're pluses and minuses. But you know what the pluses and minuses mean. Help me out here. So I wanted a slightly more paternalistic doctor there. I wanted them to tell me at least their informed opinion of what they thought I should do. But I think at the same time, we entered a kind of an interesting era of extreme paternalism in the public health sector. And this, of course, peaked in a really ugly way during the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Where public health officials, I think unlike conservatives, I tend to think that they had the best of intentions. They really wanted the best for the American public health. But public health officials would, on occasion, say things they knew were not true in public because they thought those were the things that was important for most people to think were true at that time in order to get them to behave in a way that would serve the greater good. And I definitely understand that impulse, and the practice makes me want to throw up. And it makes me want to throw up in poetry. It makes me want to throw up in public health. It makes me want to throw up in religion. It makes me want to throw up in every arena. I have a deep allergy to the noble lie. But I think very smart people, including the grandfather of Western philosophy, totally disagree with me. So fair enough. But I would like to offer you a way to talk about your poems that does not involve interpretation, does not involve how far can I go with this, how far will you let me go, does not involve spinning some bullshit I might or may not believe, but that will be good enough slop for you hogs. I would love to be able to talk to you about your poems in the way that I talk to myself about my poems. Again, I don't know exactly what this will look like. A few things I can promise you for now. One, I'm not going to let Cameron do this with me for now, at least. And maybe there will be another version of this later. But I know some of you think I'm going to do this by myself for this go round. For this round, I will just do it by myself. Cameron's a very, very good reader, and I just talked with him last night about poem submissions we're reading. But I know he can be strong medicine for some of you. So this would be just me. I won't put the text in the show notes. I won't put the text in print anywhere. And I won't say your name. I'll just do it anonymously. But I think it could be interesting. And it might be even helpful if you think I'm not a total bozo. I think I'm a pretty good editor. I'm pretty good at this. I do this for friends sometimes, close friends. I do this for Joanna. I do this with myself. And it's a different way of thinking about poems than I ever quite am able to do in the context of a broader talk especially about a really good poem. All right, this has gone on for way, way, way too long. I think I'm just going to call it there, and I will have more stuff for you later. I'm currently prepping 3 different episodes that are very different from one another. So I'm going to call it there, but please do send me a poem, or again, and who knows, I don't know how many people are going to submit, if any. So no guarantees. If you send me a poem, there's no guarantee I will give it this treatment. I will do some poems to some extent at some point, and we'll see from there. But if I do go through your poem, I will do it anonymously. I will not put the print online, and I will do it myself. So do submit your poems at SLEERICKETS@gmail.com. And I'm not doing I'm not sending written critiques to you all who I don't no promises of anything except what I just promised, right? But do send me some poems. In the future, this will probably really only be for subscribers to The Secret Show. So go subscribe to The Secret Show, SLEERICKETS.substack.com. It's cheap and it's really worth it. It is a whole other podcast. And in a way, you will also be paying a little bit for this podcast, which you already get for free, but which is not made for free, right? It takes a lot of work to make it. So I very much am grateful for your support. And if you, how did Brian put it? If you would like to sponsor other people's subscriptions, if you would like to do a good deed for the poetry community by making it possible for other people to listen to this podcast and to The Secret Show, then sign up as a motherfucker of the arts. And if you sign up as a motherfucker of the arts, as a founding member, whatever it's called on Substack, it's more expensive. And I'm open to offering perks, and maybe this will be a perk for that tier. I don't know in the future, but let me know if you think there's something that would be a cool program to do in line with that. Let me know. And if you are poor, but if you really can't afford The Secret Show and you really want to listen, send me a note. I'm a reasonable man. I'll hook you up. All right. I think that is all I've got. And I don't know if it's possible even to get your hands on one of Alice's chapbooks anymore, but if it is possible, they're really beautiful. All right. I think that's it for now. Thank you for listening. You can reach me, as always, at sleerickets@gmail.com. And with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.